Thank you, Rebecca. Thank you, Rebecca. Oh, my goodness. And you too, Angel Eli Gracias. So we got that solved. If it's not one thing, it's another, right? If it's not one thing, it's another. You know what I was just saying is we're going to be going over, are we sovereign citizens? There's a couple of people that had a website early on, and they're named Montgomery, and the other one was The Informer. And they were just tearing up this research, and they were, over a decade ago taken off of, I don't think it was YouTube, but the internet. And it's kind of like now everybody's talking about, are we sovereign citizens? How did this happen to us? Well, they lay it all out. So that is what we're going to do. I hope, I'm pretty sure we have, if I didn't have audio, somebody would have said it. But the thing with Tiger Doug, he's someone, I'm getting to a point where, I had Tiger Doug on the show, this and that. And the next thing you know, it's kind of like, well, if you should really look into the fact that everybody's saved, every single person, like universalism, there isn't sheep and goats there, we're all sheep somehow, and so, I weather these storms where different people all of a sudden, that are like, wow. And then what are they really thinking? Well, tonight we're just going to go with what I'm thinking. And we're going to start with Mike, Stellium 7, because, I just showed you that picture of him, and he is so smiling and happy. And, because as of now, he is what a new ager who basically, of course, we don't know his real name. He goes by Andreas Xerxes on the website New Tartarian, which I'm not sure is even still in business. But anyway, Andreas flew out there and introduced Mike to all of the stones crying out, and the heart is a helical heart, because he's kind of a somewhat of a big deal among health conscious chiropractors. He's a flat earther. He's big in Spain on all of this stuff. And now really he's he's taken over. He's doing the research, because I've been doing theology, but as long as Mike is on it, I feel like later I'm going to say, okay, you proved they were mammals, but I think they're all humans. You think they could be great big elephants and everything else, and we'll decide it then. But he is such a good guy whenever I've talked to him on the phone and everything else. And maybe we'll have a chance to go over some other things tonight too. It says, when I get a chance, I should check out AE War, Lost History of Flat Earth's latest vid, Volume 2, Episode 1. I would post a link, but I don't think it will go. Now, the only way I can get links while we're in a live show is if there's something called private chat on my right side, and people send me links on those private chats. But anyway, you got to see this. Exciting for this, for me. This was, the way, the big grin you see on Mike's face, that's how happy it was when, well, I'm going to let him give his whole spiel about how happy he is now that the rocks are crying out and everything else. It's only a minute and 10 seconds here.
Here I am up in the mountains. Another wonderful moment of synchronicity. See,
I think I'll read it to you. You can see over there the beautiful, that's that Mount Monyo that he thinks is not a human, but an elephant. So he's back out in the field and he's walking up to it, and look what he sees. A picture of a heart that is part flesh and part stone. Now that, to me, that's going to get this type of a reaction, is that it's the Lord that's preparing everybody's heart, for that kind of a deal, to understand that it's our heart that carries our treasure. And that's because our Heavenly Father wanted it that way. So we'll also, let's see, we're going to be looking up, these are different things that they're going to be mentioning in the email that's being read, featuring responses by Montgomery and Informer. So this one's going to be on the Northwest ordinances. We'll see if they mention that. We're ready. Here is one of the other things I had pulled up from it. We'll see if it can come across. Here's one about the habeas corpus. Habeas corpus is gone now. The inhabitants of the said territory shall always be entitled to the benefits of the writs of habeas corpus and of the trial by jury of a proportionate representation of the people in the legislature. So we have, whatever this book is, ordinance of 1787. It says the Confederate, but this is 1787. So the Confederacies were good then. What's this one? Oh, man, I'm going to make sure. Man, don't drop off now. This is just going to get good. Look at now. So when they finally used to come onto the shore, they're pretending that North America, the United States in particular, has never been discovered. So now they come ashore. What do they do I'll just pick up reading here. But fearing to be surrounded, drew off to St. Augustine to await reinforcements. On the 6th of September, cordially welcomed by the still unharmed Indians there, he made a landing. The Cacique gave his house for a headquarters, and around it a stockade was begun. The cargoes were brought ashore. Then Menendez made a formal debarkation, taking official possession amid a procession of priests chanting Te Deums and receiving and administrating the oaths of office. Such was the founding of St. Augustine, first of the permanent settlements affected by Europeans within the present limits of the United States. The event is dated, pay special attention here, from the 8th of September. In parentheses, it says old style, 1565. 17 years before the founding of Santa Fe, 42 years before the permanent colonization of Virginia by England. Almost 3/4 of a century had been consumed in the vague and vain endeavors of the Spanish discoverers and explorers and gold hunters to establish themselves on the mainland of North America above the Tropic of Cancer. So we'll get into, hopefully sharing some of those, links. Now you gotta drop that in the private chat. I don't know where it would be. In my studio, it's on the right-hand side, but you see, it's not a matter. You see, when I click on a comment, that's all it does is show the comment. So Montgomery's emails.
Research paper. It is not. In fact, if you take it out, it changes nothing. The historical documents speak for themselves.
Let's get one
Most
more
of you
minute
folks
here.
would know, because most people have a tendency to avoid learning about stuff they're not supposed to know. They're obedient serf peasants, obedient servants. Servants to men, not the Lord. At any rate, this is part 4 of just how in America we wound up being landless peasants, feudal servants. How did that happen? Well, this is part 4 of telling you how it happened. This is your email questions answered by James Montgomery. Here goes. Hello, Robert. The quote from the Legions of Satan book was taken from a book I had read a few years back. It is my understanding this book has long been out of print. I don't understand why you suggest this is a major quote in my research paper. It is not. In fact, if you take it out, it changes nothing. The historical documents speak for themselves. If you look, you will find them. I found most of them on the internet. My work is not a global world order type theory. I would not waste several years researching a subject to prove what most people believe is a fiction. Below, I will review just a few of the irrefutable facts. The facts Fact, the 1215 Magna Carta took place. The king granted rights and lands to the barons, with the Pope signing off on the Magna Carta. Fact, a couple months later, the Pope declared the 1215 Magna Carta null and void. Fact, the king started businesses called Virginia and Carolina, etc. in America. Fact, these American charters were non-revocable trusts. Fact, the king claimed all lands in America settled by his subjects as his, as a matter of conquest. Fact, the king, by way of the charters, possessed allodial ownership of this land. The king did. Fact, by way of the charters, the king retained for himself and all his heirs and successors 30% of all gold, silver, and copper to be sent to him annually. Fact, our forefathers declared themselves subjects of the king. Fact, the king had lawful title to this land. Our forefathers could not claim what they never owned. Fact, the Revolutionary War was over taxation, not subjection to the king. Fact, the king ceded the land above ground in the 1783 peace treaty to the states. Fact, the king did not cede the gold, silver, and copper to the states. Fact, the king could not cede the minerals to the states because of parties not yet born, his successors yet to serve as future kings of England, as a result of the trust he created. Fact, the inhabitants were not granted anything by the king. Fact, since the king retained the mineral rights to America, no man, free or otherwise, had allodial title to his land. He was a mere tenant. Fact, the king allowed the inhabitants of the states to believe they were free, just as with the British people in the 1215 Magna Carta and the duped Brits in the 1689 Declaration of Rights. Fact, for a short period of time, 11 years to be exact, the inhabitants of the colonies/states were declared to be freemen. Fact, freemen status ended with the passage of the 1787 Constitution, because all state inhabitants were now declared by their representatives to be citizens, subject to the laws of the U.S. government. Fact, the states ceded their grants of land and most of their sovereignty to the 1787 Constitution and government. Fact, the king knew a central government was going to be created by the states when he signed the 1783 Peace Treaty. Fact, by the creation of the 1787 Constitution, a republic was created. Fact, the republic in no way was a hindrance to the king in regaining his land via taxation and banking. Fact, the 1787 Constitution created a 10-mile square district not subject to the restraints of the 1787 Constitution. Fact, the 1789 Judiciary Act, passed by Congress, established courts of law compatible with England, so contracts and business would continue with England. Fact, in 1791, Washington, who once said no to being the king, and also said he did not want independence from the king, nevertheless allowed the office of president to become a monarchy outside of the 1787 Constitution when he declared he was dividing the states into district states. Fact, the district states are subject to the president. This has never been changed. Fact, 1791, the Bank of the United States was allowed to be chartered by Washington. Fact, the bank was financed by the British Board of Trade, which was controlled by the Pope and the Rothschild cabal. Fact, in 1811, when Congress refused to recharter the bank, England declared war on the United States. Fact, in 1810, the original 13th Amendment was proposed, the one that got memory hold. The original 13th Amendment in 1810, which would have effectively removed the king's power of reclaiming his land from the American people by removing the possibility of lawyers/esquires running and obtaining office in the United States government. Fact, the War of 1812 took place, the main objective of which was the burning of our documents in Washington, which they did. And why did they leave after that? Gee, you capture the enemy's capital, you burn down the main building, and then you leave? Since when does a conquering army take over a capital and then leave? Obviously, they had an objective. They accomplished the objective. They burned the paperwork, and then they left. They had no interest in a conquest. They already had us in conquest financially. Back to the words of Montgomery here. The War of 1812 took place, the main objective of which was the burning of our documents in Washington and the increasing of the debt of the U.S., so the bank would have to be rechartered. That's what the 1812 War was really all about. It was about the original 13th Amendment that would have prevented lawyers/esquires from serving in Congress, because that is a title of nobility. Yes, it is. Yes, it is. Do not deny it. The facts are here. Read the rest of what this man, James Montgomery, has written, his research over many, many assiduous years. and read the works of the informer. The Esquire is a title of nobility. All attorneys in the United States are beholden ultimately to the British barrister. It's a fact. It's a very, very little known fact unless you know a few secret handshakes and winks of the eye, but it's a fact. And the other reason for the War of 1812 was because Congress had just had the temerity, the gall, to not re-ante, to not sign up once again to renew the charter of the dastardly National Bank that was even then beholden to the Bank of England, Bank of London. Continuing with Montgomery. Fact, the Jay Treaty of 1792 took place, giving away much of what was won in the 1783 peace treaty. Yeah, what little was. Fact, in 1816, the Second Bank of the United States was chartered. That's 1816. Fact, in 1836, President Jackson refused to allow the bank to be rechartered. An assassination attempt was then made on his life, of course. Just like what happened with Jesus and JFK. And you can go on down the line. You don't mess with the bankers if you're a leader of any kind. Fact, since the king was denied the taxation through his bank, Congress then passed the Act of 1845. His emissaries and loyal subjects, the judiciary, i.e. the lawyers/esquires, confirmed the Act of 1845 with the insular cases. I want to know more about those insular cases. What the heck were they? Anybody out there knows, drop me a line, huh? Montgomery writes about them several times, but so far in my reading of his, he never does elaborate on what were these insular cases, which, he claims, allowed admiralty law to come onto land, granting Congress and the president even more power. Fact, England began using propaganda through the news media concerning the slaves in the South when the king was the biggest slave trader in the world. Fact, the Civil War, and I will put in so-called Civil War. I don't know how you can call it a civil war when, civil wars, isn't it? Both sides are vying for total control, for control of the whole nation. Isn't that a proper civil war? No, I think it's more properly, the South just wanted to get the heck away, right? Leave us alone. It's more properly, I think, called the war between the states. Yeah, and it's you're going too far if you're a Southern belligerent to call it the War of Northern Aggression. And what is it? What do the Northerners call it? Guys like the Collins brothers, they call it this because they're up in Ohio. What do they call it? And they don't have their stuff together. They call it the War of Southern Rebellion, something like that. It's ridiculous. Folks, let's stay neutral here. It's the war between the states. And it's not the euphemism, the Civil War. It wasn't a civil war. Fact, the so-called Civil War ended the 1787 Constitution, first by sine die, i.e. no lawful Congress. Second, by passage of the 14th Amendment. Fact, the Southern states were granted a full pardon by President Lincoln and Johnson. Fact, the Southern states retook their seats in Congress. Fact, the reseated Southern states voted on the 13th Amendment in Congress, and it was ratified by the Southern states. Fact, the Northern states then redeclared war against the Southern states because they would not then ratify the 14th Amendment. Fact, a permanent state of emergency was declared and martial law put in place by the unlawful passage of the euphemistically named Reconstruction Acts. Fact, Lawful state governments were removed by an unlawful military occupation by direction of an unlawful Congress. Fact, puppet governments were put in place by the unlawful military occupying commanders by direction of the unlawful Congress. Fact, the puppet governments of the southern states ratified the 14th Amendment. Fact, the 1787 Constitution, by the unlawful passage of the 14th Amendment, was forever dead. Fact, with the king again in control, the bankers began the full-fledged rape of America. And that's what I am right now. How about you? I'm raped. How are you? How are you doing? Not raped yet? It's coming. It's coming for you. Fact, in 1869, 1 year after the passage, feudal serf, it's coming for you. 1 year after the passage of the 14th Amendment, Gould and Fisk corner the gold market for the bankers. 1869 that happened with the help of President Grant, and this was known as Black Friday. Fact, in 1873, Congress removes the silver coin from the market. That same year, the crash of 1873 begins and lasts for 3 years. Fact, in 1900, Congress passes the Gold Standard Act and creates a gold reserve of $150 billion and allows the bankers to sell bonds to maintain this gold level. Fact, in 1907, just 7 years later, the stock market crashes. Fact, because of this crash, 2 death blows occur in 1913. A, the 16th Amendment is quote-unquote passed, and the Federal Reserve Act is passed. Fact, the Federal Reserve Act was written in England at the Bank of England. I'm the one I'm putting quotes in past here for the 16th Amendment. I'm going to go ahead and put the quotes in under the Federal Reserve Act as well, since they waited until Christmas Eve, when most decent pagan Americans were home worshiping the Christmas tree, to pass it, and only the bankers' boys were there to vote on it. Anyway, fact, the Federal Reserve Act was written in England at the Bank of England by New York and English bankers. Fact, the Federal Reserve is a direct descendant of England's exchequer, which comes from, you guessed it, William the Conqueror and his form of taxation via the Doomsday Book. Finally, they're not using euphemisms, these bureaucratic-minded Satan servers. The Doomsday Book. Hey, man, probably because it was back in the Middle Ages, people still talked plain and didn't use Orwellian euphemisms. They called it what it was, the Doomsday Book. Fact, the Doomsday Book of William the Conqueror is the county recorder's office today. Fact, World War I increases the national debt and sees the passage of the War Powers Act in 1917. Fact, the true United States independent treasury, created in 1814, that dealt in specie, was abolished by the Act of 1920, thereby allowing the private Federal Reserve Board to control the money of America as the fiscal agent of the United States. Fact, between 1913 and 1929, the bankers and the Congress enter into gold-guaranteed contracts totaling $300 billion, when only 3% of that amount of gold existed in the world. Fact, the New York bankers, vis-a-vis fraudulent acts, transfer huge amounts of gold to the Bank of England by 1929, along with the debt of the U.S., bringing about the stock market crash of 1929. Fact, in 1933, the American people are declared enemies of the bankers, and the conquest and transference of America is complete. That was 1933, folks.
So I'm going to pause it right there for a second, see if we have any questions or anything like that. Greetings to everybody. Dwayne, Joel, good to see you guys here. Quite an interesting thing here. The Informer and James Montgomery. And I really, I don't have any of their books. The only thing I have is this channel. It's called James Ambus. And it has a lot of their old work. I think it fits into, they released it then, and a lot of people found out, that our government was, this and wrong and everything else. But it still leaves us in a predicament too, because now we know, well, now they've leaked the earth is flat. Now they've leaked, NASA's a hoax. They've added 1,000 years. Many people believe that we should read the Bible as Armageddon's over. And, we're all chasing, information like this that leads us to say, well, we're really not sovereign. They really haven't taken it. And what should we do about it? But, and to have all of that knowledge without really, applying it or having a way to say, okay, now what am I going to do? Because in my humble opinion, there are a lot of people in this world who are aware of this. I'm one of them. So are all of you. What are we going to do about it? Fight to the death about it? Are we really going to say, man, I haven't stayed in shape all my life to lay down? No, you didn't. You stayed in shape to help carry babies over mountains, to keep people alive so that they can be blessed. And let's just finish off this whole, it's this book that God wrote, the end from the beginning, where there will be people that are aware that the rapture happened then. The book was written for those people then. And then it says after that, there'll be a group that survive something called Gog and Magog. That's going to be bad, but not as bad as Armageddon. And I'm beginning to really think that the people who can't let go of the rapture, that just can't, that says nothing is going to take my hope that this is over, I get out of here. I think that really, is a phobia of living for God. Because as long as God has us here, we're to, protect the young, keep them from being millstoned. We have a life. And unfortunately, I know I've had many people tell me, and I imagine it's true, that, oh no, I just voted for Bill Clinton because I want the rapture. And as soon as they mess things up bad enough, Jesus is going to have to come and save us. And you guys have all heard some version of that also. So their only hope is they don't care. If they can just buckle down a little bit more, God's going to take me away. Well, what if he doesn't? What if I'm right? What if other people are right? And it's not going to happen right away. And we've got 25 more years. Or if you're like what I used to be, a post-millennial, I'd think, oh, so what if it takes 200 or 300 years? Gradually we'll do it, and then Jesus can come back, instead of reading it the way the Lord is showing it to us right now. So a comment from Joel. Kind of think it was Jesus himself who put the Bible together for us. Also, when did year 0 start over? I think it was the beginning of the millennial reign. Yeah, and that's part of the confusion also, because, we have to call it something, and we end up calling it, 70 AD. Okay, that was the world's idea of that was the destruction of Jerusalem, and they call it 70 AD. It probably is too late for me to work that, but it's not too late for someone, like the age of the people in the room right now. You guys can eventually, call 70 AD, year zero, and it went. But it's probably, they wouldn't have made it as easy as just going, like, let's say, so 1070, that's when all of the weird history happens, but a lot of it does. So we don't really know when year zero happened. We know that it could have been, a years long destruction of Jerusalem. The Lord said it was better because they were equally as evil in the eyes of God, Sodom, Gomorrah, and Jerusalem, when they were destroyed. And the Lord talks about he was easier on Sodom and Gomorrah, just boom, it's over, than Jerusalem, because they, their crimes were so much worse against the Messiah that it ended up being, how would you rather just boom be judged, or would you rather be sieged for years where you end up, and this is gross, I know, eating your children, and then getting to the point of where it says they were cutting off their arms and eating it, self cannibalism and things. It got bad. So we have that going on. Didn't I just look up something I wanted to? Always going to look up the Doomsday Book. Let's just pick it back up with a couple of more minutes of James Montgomery's emails. In fact, it's all about the gold. It's all about, are we really sovereign citizens? I hope he gets into that, because we're only going to give it, actually, this video is, I'm only going to listen to about 10 more minutes.
Fact, in 1933, because of the United States corporation's insolvency, the United States is forced to reorganize and implement the social and financial programs mandated by the bankers of New York and England. Fact, in 1933, the king's hold and ownership of America's gold vis-a-vis the bankers is complete, and America's death is ensured by the acceptance of fiat money, Federal Reserve notes. Fact, after 1933, the king's collection of taxes increases, along with increased power given to the IRS, his collection arm. Kind of like the Sheriff of Nottingham in Middle Age England, Renaissance England, whatever. Fact, World War II increases the debt even further, which demands more taxes on the backs of Americans now that they are co-sureties for the debt as defined by the Federal Insurance Contribution Act of 1934. Fact, now that the enslavement of America is complete, the enslavement of the world was begun by the ratification of the UN Charter in 1945. Fact, the United States had to turn over $8 billion in gold to join the UN, just 12 years after there was not enough gold in this country, and it was declared having gold was a crime. That's a good point. You ever thought of that? The U.S. had to turn over $8 billion in gold just to join the UN, and that was only 12 years after it was declared by FDR. There was not enough gold in this country, and your poor everyday average Joe had to go turn in his wedding rings and whatnot. Oh man, Never underestimate a serf's capability to comply, to be fooled. Here we are. Oh, one more fact. The Korean and Vietnam Wars explode the debt that is already heaped on the backs of the American people. And so here we are. That's what I said at the beginning, right? Here we are in total feudal serfdom. Welcome, revel in it, right? Revel in it. Go outside and roll around. Go roll around and make dirt angels. Lie on your back and make dirt angels in the king's sand. I mean the Pope's dirt out in your yard. Go do that. Revel in it. Enjoy the Pope's dirt, because it sure ain't your dirt. It sure ain't. How do I know? Stop paying your property taxes. See what happens. That goes back to William the Conqueror. Here we are. I have given you just some of the historical facts contained in my research papers because they are a matter of history and or congressional record. These cannot be rebutted. I have done the legwork and given the sources in my research papers. Those that are ignorant of history are doomed to repeat it. Signed, James Montgomery. The following are some additional facts contributed by the informer that were not contained in James Montgomery's research papers.
I think that he finds
the
out.
bank was financed by the British Board of Trade.
Yeah, I think he finds out that these were some of the other, emails that they were just combined. Now, the guy's name is James Ambus. And so this is a show that Gordon Comstock did in 2011, early 2011. So here is his so his earliest video is 8 years old. So he had stopped making videos when I started watching him 5 or 6 years ago now. And I really did try to get in touch with him. Let's see what his most popular video is. Well, the one I've mirrored this a number of times. Family of Secrets is the best one.
Is the stuff underneath, and that hasn't been really touched yet. And we're going to try and bring some of that up to the surface and find out if some of you can get a hold of it. I know I did a public appearance alongside Larry Bensky of KPFA, who is currently covering the Contra Gate and Iran Gate hearings for the Pacifica News Network. And Larry was, his focus, his speech was on the things that we will be looking for, although not necessarily actually expecting to see or hear during the Contra Gate hearings. And one of the things that, one of many things that Larry and I agreed on very strongly was that the sleeper issue in the whole Contra Gate hearing was the drug issue, and that if this came up and was actually addressed with any sort of open-mindedness at all, it could quite conceivably blow the Reagan administration right out of the water. The Just Say No, Nancy sitting on Mr. T's lap to lecture Emmanuel Lewis about the evils of drug abuse, Reagan administration right smack dab out of the harbor. And as we had feared, so far it has been virtually a non-issue. Well, we intend to do what we can, Dave and I, in our small way to rectify that situation tonight and perhaps spawn a few angry letters to the committee, to the newspapers, and a few angry phone calls to some of the other talk shows. So
we've broken down the Iran-Contra Gate material into three basic categories. Now, one of the things that should be understood is that all three of these categories, in a sense, bleed off heavily into one another. They're very closely interrelated, so much so that, in fact, at least to a certain extent, the distinction among them is academic, at least up to a point. We're doing this so that people can break down the wealth of information that's coming into a, well, I don't even know if this is a word, a conceptualizable, a conceptually viable framework so that people can comprehend and file away what's going on. The first part of the program that we're doing this evening is on the drug connections to the Iran-Contra scandal. Part 2, Radio Free America number 30, is going to be on the evening of Wednesday, June 24th from 7 p.m. to 11 p.m. And there we're going to deal with a subject which intersects very closely with the drug connections, namely the terror connections. In fact, the many terrorist connections to the Iran-Contra scandal not only intersect with, but to a certain extent grow right out of the drug connections we're going to be talking about this evening. Let me explain right off the bat, as you will discover during the course of this three-part series, that certain articles, certain elements of information will be repeated in other broadcasts. There will be a considerable degree of overlap, particularly between the first two programs, although obviously the cover-up itself. Part 3 will be on the evening of Sunday, July 12th, from 7 p.m. to 11 p.m. That will be the cover-up. The items being covered up, as Nip indicated, one of the truly explosive aspects of the Iran-Contra scandal is the drug connections, the use of large-scale narcotics trafficking to finance the arms purchases. This is a long-standing tactic of the U.S. covert intelligence establishment, as we looked at rather exhaustive length in our 5-part series, Radio Free America shows 24 through 28. Number 29 will proceed directly from those broadcasts, and number 30, in a sense, will proceed directly from number 29, and will also refer back heavily to our Drugs and Intelligence series. Number 31, on Sunday, July 12th, will represent the cover-up of the two explosive issues here, the drug connections and the terror connections. As Nip indicated, the Reagan administration has inveighed heavily against drug abuse. Certainly, we would agree with his basic outlook. However, his tactics and other means of addressing the problem, including trafficking and the very drugs that he is condemning, we disagree with fundamentally. The Reagan administration has also obviously banged the drum loudly and frequently against the terrorist menace. What we're going to be looking at in our next program is how this arms for drugs traffic that figures at the core of Iran-Contra has been used to finance world terrorism. We're going to be taking a look at the Triple Wilson team at considerable length. We'll be looking at them some this evening. We're going to take a look at the terror connections next. The cover-up will be, in my opinion, in our opinion, is being effected to a considerable extent to cover up the two great bugaboos of the Reagan administration, terrorism and drug trafficking, both of which Ronald Reagan has laid at the doorstep of the evil empire of the Soviet Union. If the Iran-Contra scandal were not to be covered up, and the third part of our program is going to deal with some strong indications that at least to a certain extent it will be, then the Reagan administration would find itself being blamed, and rightfully so, for the two great evils that it has laid at the door of our Russian competitor.
Yes, if we had to find a subtitle for this whole mini-series, this three-part series, what springs to my mind are the words of the great Walt Kelly, the wonderful satirist and cartoonist who did Pogo for so many years. And in the height of the McCarthy hearings, one of his Pogo strips ended with the words, "We have met the enemy and it is us." And in fact, that is exactly what we're talking about, folks. Everything that we have been screaming and yelling about in the finest form of psychotic displacement, we have been howling about on the international stage for years. Well, it's us, folks. We've been doing it, and we're doing it now, and we will continue to do it unless stop is put to it.
Also, the words of Ben Franklin in Poor Richard's Almanac, "Those who live in glass houses shouldn't throw stones." And indeed, for looking at it in the context of that well-known phrase, we could also term the Radio Free America 29 through 31 tapes the Glass House tapes, of course, punning on the subject material of a good part of Radio Free America number 23, a book by that exact title, although dealing with a different, although related subject matter.
We're in trouble now, Dave. We've got jargon. We've got in jokes. I mean, we've been doing this too long.
Well, I think we're going to be repeating the series beginning with after Radio Free America 31. We are going to add some programs to the archive series, but we're going to begin repeating them for the benefit of people that have not been with us since April of '84 when we first began this series. As we repeat them, we're going to begin developing a source index. Each item will be listed by the source, and we're going to put those on a sheet that'll be available with each tape from DAFCOR as we begin rebroadcasting them. So, because a lot of people have requested something of that type, in essence, it'll represent a broad subject and source index that will be available for each broadcast, and maybe we can cross-reference it between the various programs as well. But the Enterprise has now reached, of course, punning on what was referred to, this whole operation was referred to our Enterprise, not the Enterprise, and is going to proceed to stage 2 now, and we're going to begin trying to get a few things in print off of these Radio Free America programs, as well as rebroadcasting them for people that have not been with us right from the start.
That's right. Now, speaking of infrastructure, and infrastructure is indeed what we've been talking about here, the infrastructure of Radio Free America is for those of you who like to know what you have coming up ahead of you this evening, and also for those of you who want to perhaps summarize it on the tape covers or something, and don't want to have to skip through the whole thing piece by piece. Why don't we run down real quickly what we're going to be covering in the upcoming broadcast, at least in a general sort of way, and let you know what we will be proceeding with in the next 4 hours.
What we're going to begin with is something called the Medellin cartel. That's a cocaine smuggling cartel operating out of Colombia. As we're going to see, it was heavily involved with the Contra supply operation. A good portion of the proceeds from the Iran-Contra scandal have the Iran-Contra.
So we're not going to be watching all 4 hours, but we are going to be watching and, stopping and dropping some commentary, a couple hours here probably. And, the simple fact is, I want to show that, the Democrats and the Republicans have worked together from the very beginning. And that's when in 1958, when DARPA and everything else, as far as I know, my dad, and I remember my dad when he was, still in his 20s, because I was born when he was like 20 and my sister, he was 18 and my mom was 18 or something like that, and they didn't know jack, but they had the Bible memorized, but they just didn't live. So I don't know much about them. My grandparents were all, you couldn't ask them a straight question without, it's spinning into something. I knew a girl that ate so much ice cream, her brain froze and she died. It's like, Grandma, that's not possible. You're 8 and you're going, that doesn't happen. Well, it happened, sure enough. We just don't know what's going on. But the real reason is if you can get your mind around that Ronald Reagan and the Republicans are in on it, it will make it easier to understand that even this was when they still thought that they had a chance to kick back against the mafia. We're still mafias, controlling this for money and corporations. This has been a corporate war since they scrapped the old Constitution and the United States capitals, letters and all of that from 1871. If you don't have that down yet and just believe it, it's good to get it down. And we just went over some of that. And this guy, James Ambus, I know a lot of you people like Joel, Victoria, you like to listen to things, and you probably like me where sometimes, you can't, write down in a notebook or pay attention, but you're listening and working. James Ambus and those tapes are really going to help you a lot to lock down those numbers. But so this Barry Seal, and where am I going? It's all leading up from Reagan, Bush's, Kennedy's, people who were mobsters in the 30s are now mobsters in there. And it all led up to 2001, where they finally had the younger Bush in there to go, oh no, oh my goodness, what's happening? We're going to go attack them, and they're bad. And we all watched that, and it changed the world. And it did change the world. And, of course, I've got big ideas of how much it changed the world, but we have to start with it changed the world. So we'll see if I can't come up with something to look at while we're watching and listening to this video. Barry Seal and the Iran-Contra scandal.
Operation, I should say, have proceeded from cocaine smuggling in partnership with the Medellin cartel. We're going to take a look at that. We're going to take a look at attempts by the U.S. covert team, the secret team, as the Christic Institute people refer to it, to pin that very same drug smuggling on the Sandinistas. We're going to take a look at a sting which was set up by the secret team. It was supposed to sting the Sandinistas, in fact, it appears that it wound up stinging elements of the Contras, and in particular wound up stinging a DEA informant named Adler Barry Seal, who is going to testify perhaps about the Contra Medellin cartel link. He was assassinated under as yet strange circumstances. We're going to take a look at some of the information he might have been able to reveal, namely the use of cocaine smuggling by the U.S. intelligence establishment to finance the Contra arms purchases. This stands out very, I should say this will be a subject which will look very familiar, it should be very familiar to veterans of our previous programs on the intelligence community's involvement in narcotics and arms smuggling, specifically Radio Free America programs number 25, 26, and 27. We're going to take a look at some cases relating to the Medellin Contra link. We're going to take a look at the Pizza Connection case, a heroin and a cocaine smuggling case out of New York, which may very well dovetail not only with the Medellin cartel, but also with elements of the White House, specifically George Bush and the family, and the former White House Chief of Staff, Donald Regan. We're going to take a look at that. We're going to take a look at a history of the involvement of Brigade 2506 and the anti-Castro Cubans in the drug trafficking and with the secret team that we're talking about. This will overlap to a considerable extent with information provided on Radio Free America shows 26 and 27, also number 24 as well, about the involvement of the U.S. intelligence community in the Southeast Asian drug traffic. We're also going to take a look at something called the Nugan Bank. That is a subject matter that we covered on RFA number 25 as well. We're going to leave off with a look at members of the Turple and Wilson team and their involvement with Nugan and some of the operations underlying the machinations of the secret team. We're going to proceed from that to Radio Free America number 30. We're going to resume with the Turple Wilson team, Brigade 2506, an organization called Karu, and some of their terrorist depredations. But in a nutshell, that's what we're going to be dealing with this evening. And again, the programs will overlap with each other to a considerable extent, and the material will proceed very directly and very smoothly, hopefully, from information provided in our recently concluded Radio Free America series on the intelligence community and narcotics trafficking. And so that's basically what we have on tap.
All right, without further ado then, I suppose we have made all of our necessary announcements, and we can proceed to the meat of the broadcast, the information that we're going to be putting together for you tonight. We're going to start off with an article from Covert Action Information Bulletin, CAIB, Covert Action Information Bulletin. This is issue number 27, their special issue on the religious right. This is an article starting on the back page. It's one of their cover articles titled Disinformation Gate. The article is by Fred Landis. Fred Landis, among other things, co-writer of an excellent book, Death in Washington, that we recommend quite frequently on this broadcast.
And we'll be using on RFA number 30.
Indeed. Okay, again, reading from Disinformation Gate, an article by Fred Landis. The North Ledeen team. North, meaning, of course, Oliver North, and Michael Ledeen have worked together in a number of operations in recent years. Very different, but all, one way or another, involving PSYOPs, P-S-Y-O-P-S, or disinformation. PSYOPs, of course, is short for psychological operations. In 1983, North was involved in the Grenada invasion. And it skips down he worked with Delta Force, which worked in the early hours of the invasion. The media were excluded, and U.S. Army PSYOPs took over the local press and radio. The mainstream U.S. media got a bizarre white paper authored by Michael Ledeen, purportedly based upon the 3 tons of documentation the U.S. invaders seized. That same year, Ledeen and North participated in a National Security Council planning group that led to the creation of the State Department's Office of Public Diplomacy. North fed the office CIA and DIA material on Nicaragua, grist for its propaganda mill, while Ledeen and others churned it out. In 1984, North masterminded an attempted drug trade sting against Nicaragua. North's colleague, quote, retired, unquote, General Richard V. Secord, purchased a C-123K cargo plane from Southern Air Transport. It was outfitted with hidden cameras and turned over to DEA agent Barry Adler Seal, otherwise sometimes known as Adler Barry Seal. The last name spelled like the animal, S-E-A-L. Seal then force-landed at a military airfield in Nicaragua, where he got photos of a Nicaraguan official, Federico Vaughn, investigating. That photo then became the basis of much disinformation on a supposed Jorge Castro narcotics trafficking ring. President Reagan used the photo on television, stating, with utterly no evidence or justification, that a box in the picture was filled with drugs. Like a bad penny, the same plane returned to Nicaragua in October 1986 carrying Eugene Hassenfuss. Now, this is interesting for a variety of reasons. One of the things we talked about in our introductory words tonight, of course, was the glass houses not throwing stones concept, also the pot calling the kettle black concept. There has been a massive disinformation campaign, which many of our listeners, because they're not the kind of people who perhaps read Reader's Digest all the time or listen to religious evangelists. Well, some of our listeners do listen to the religious evangelists, but this has become a major key point in the anti-Sandinista propaganda is the supposed story of Sandinista/Castro drug peddling. And as we're going to see, the story not only originated within the Reagan administration, within the DEA, but there's some other mighty weird things attached to it.
Now, again, the Iran-Contra scandal first broke when Eugene Hassenfuss was shot down over Nicaragua in a C-123 that was being used to ferry arms and make airdrops to the Contras operating in and near Nicaragua. As we're going to see, and as was indicated in the article Nip just read from Covert Action, that very plane, the C-123, was secured by Adler Barry Seal for the alleged Sandinista drug sting, which we're going to talk about in just a minute. As we're going to see, that's the very same plane that Eugene Hassenfuss was using in the Iran-Contra supply, in the Contra supply effort, I should say. And as we're going to look at, as we develop the Adler Barry Seal situation, much of the working capital in order to supply those arms came from cocaine smuggling. The very cocaine that was supposed to be being smuggled by the Sandinistas was in fact being smuggled by the Contras and elements allied with them. Research credit for the following story goes to Ted Rubenstein, an excellent researcher who's been working with us for some time. He got this from the Miami Herald. It's from the Herald of October 9th, 1986. It's by Jeff Lean, L-E-E-N, and Alfonso Chardy. It's headlined, Downed Craft Linked to Drugs. Subtitled, Two on Plane Had Ties to Miami Firm. Skipping down on the article, in the summer of 1984, Doan, that's a fellow who was operating was operating Doan helicopter, which provided the plane to Southern Air Transport. In the summer of 1984, Doan swapped a C-123 to Adler Barry Seal, a Baton Rouge pilot and drug smuggler who became an undercover informant for the U.S. Drug Enforcement Administration, according to Kent Sherman, a consultant on the deal who was a partner in Sherman Aircraft of West Palm Beach. Seal flew the plane to Rickenbacker Air Force Base in Ohio, where it was outfitted with hidden cameras by the CIA, according to a DEA agent who testified in court in Fort Lauderdale. Seal then piloted the aircraft to Nicaragua and returned with 1,472 pounds of cocaine. The cameras filmed Federico Vaughn, V-A-U-G-H-A-N, who U.S. officials said was an employee of the Nicaraguan Interior Ministry helping load cocaine into the plane. As we're going to see, it is highly doubtful whether or not that cocaine really, in fact, came from the Sandinistas. As we're going to see, all of the people surrounding this alleged sting of the Sandinistas were, in fact, very closely tied to the Contras.
Just a short snippet of an article here to start off with. This is from an article entitled Who Killed Barry Seal by Joel Millman. And the article is originally published in the Village Voice for July 1, 1986.
Research credit for this also goes to Ted Rubenstein.
Again, a short segment from the article. Who killed Barry Seal? Federal officials were quick to point the finger at Colombian cocaine lords against whom Seal was expected to testify later this year. But others may have wished to see Seal dead as well, including those behind the secret war against Nicaragua. In fact, evidence has emerged that Seal may have set up the so-called Sandinista cocaine smuggling operation himself, on orders from or with the cooperation of top administration officials. There are even those within the Soldier of Fortune community who believe that Seal had first-hand knowledge of drug smuggling operations involving the Contras. Now, one of the things, again, we talked about so interesting about this is Adler Barry Seal made what appears to have been a forced landing at a Sandinista base in Nicaragua. Adler-Berry Seal then took photos, which his C-123 was specially designed to take. Again, remember the same plane that wound up being Eugene Hassenfuss's plane. And in those pictures, he caught a Sandinista official of some sort by the name of Federico Vaughn. And then later on, there were allegations that Vaughn himself was involved and that there was a box of drugs he was handing over and all kinds of things. Well, not only is it doubtful, is there some reason to question whether, in fact, there was a box of drugs at all, et cetera, but even Federico Vaughn is a rather interesting person.
Now, about the Adler-Berry Seal operation, as we're going to see, while stinging the Medellin cartel, Seal came across information that the Medellin cartel, far from working with the Sandinistas, was in fact working with the Contras. Continuing now with a Village Voice article from July 1st of 1986. My brother was a detail man, says Ben Seal. Obviously, that's Adler-Berry Seal's brother. He dealt in minutiae, not in broad concepts. While the war on drugs is certainly a broad concept, Seal's involvement with the DEA and the federal prosecutors entered a new phase with the Ocoas, the Ocoas being one of the major families of the Medellin cartel. Barry Seal was doing something more than recording phone conversations or arranging the purchase of airplanes for drug smugglers or flying their drug receipts down to Panama for laundering. He was now embarking on a route that would bring him into the secret war against Nicaragua. The Ocoa cartel was in turmoil in the spring of 1984. Investigations into its smuggling activities were intensifying on both sides of the Caribbean. Early in the year, an important coca processing plant outside Medellin had been raided and destroyed by Colombian police. Medellin, by the way, is Medellin. In April, the cartel was linked to the murder of Colombia's Minister of Justice. After years of dealing with impunity, top lieutenants of Flavio and Jorge Ocoa were fugitives from their own country, holed up in Panama trying to plea bargain an agreement with Colombian officials. Against this background, Seal continued to gather evidence against the cartel, meeting with Bates and Bustamante in the Bahamas and Panama, and together with Emil Camp, running small errands to earn the Ocoa's trust. Those gentlemen, by the way, were the people who were running Adler-Berry Seal for the DEA. Continuing with the Voice article, he, Seal, agreed to fly a load of 1,500 kilograms of cocaine up from Colombia to Louisiana, the shipment that would be the basis of the U.S. case against the cartel. It was, in most respects, a normal exercise of baiting a trap and letting authorities know when to spring the snare until Seal brought in the Sandinistas. According to Seal's later Miami court testimony, he came upon the Sandinista connection by accident. He testified that when he first met with Jorge and Flavio Ocoa in Medellin, they told him they would soon be moving their processing facility to Managua, where, despite the fact that they themselves were staunch anti-communists, they said they had brought top Sandinista ministers into allowing them access to military airfields. Later, Seal would revise his story to say that the Ocoas had also included Panama and possibly Costa Rica as locations for new facilities. Skipping down still further, according to Richard Grigori, the U.S. attorney who later put Seal on the stand in Miami, Seal flew the Ocoa's cocaine up from Colombia to the U.S. an average of twice a month for almost 2 years prior to becoming a federal informant. Yet despite months of difficult evidence gathering, the Ocoas may never come to trial. It is not clear how or where the breakdown in the case started, but within days of the fat lady's return from Managua, the Ocoa investigation began to unravel. With the alleged Sandinista connection, what had been a routine narcotics sting against the Ocoas suddenly took on political overtones, and separate federal agencies began to work at cross purposes. While federal prosecutor Grigori and the DEA were relying on Seal to bring back the goods on the Ocoa cartel, the CIA and the White House, which by then was taking a direct interest in Seal's flights, were more interested in the cartel's alleged Sandinista associates. The Ocoa case, in short, was top priority with the DEA, but the Sandinista connection was top priority with the CIA, while the Colombia case demanded secrecy, the Managua case demanded publicity. And as we're going to see, the allegation on the part of the Ocoa people that they were working with the Sandinistas begins to unravel rather quickly, and instead it becomes clear that in fact the Medellin cartel was working very, very closely with the Contras, and all of the people involved with this same sting were much more closely connected to the Contras rather than to the Sandinistas. And in fact, there are direct connections between the Contra supply effort, people involved in that, and the assassination of Barry Seal, supposedly conducted by the Medellin cartel.
Skipping down in the same story, but closer examination of Seal's best-known exploit, the flying of Colombian cocaine into and out of Managua, may actually yield more damaging evidence against the White House and the Contras than against the Sandinistas. As skepticism grows over the administration's claim of a Sandinista connection to international dope trafficking, new charges are being raised that the Contras, not the Sandinistas, are involved with the cocaine trade. In the weeks leading up to Seal's murder, prominent congressional Democrats began pressing for hearings on alleged Contra abuses. U.S. Customs began an investigation into those charges, as well as into other charges that some of the Contra's, quote, private supporters may have trafficked in illegal arms. Some reports have linked the Ochoas to Contra leaders in northern Costa Rica, which raises yet more questions about Seal's activities with the cartel. Quote, "What I still want to know," says John Camp, Seal's Baton Rouge TV biographer, "is just who was Federico Vaughn." Vaughn disappeared in the summer of 1984 after his indictment in Miami. He is believed to be in Managua, possibly in the custody of the Sandinistas, who deny that Vaughn has ever been a, quote, top official or has worked for the government in any capacity since 1982. But if Federico Vaughn remains a mystery, his cousin's career is better known. Barney Vaughn is a banker in Miami, and he has ties to the Contras. Vaughn worked for Popular Bank of Hialeah until the end of last year, and now works for BAC International Credit Corporation of Miami and the Cayman Islands. Popular Bank is one of several Florida banks the General Accounting Office has identified as holding Contra accounts. And, according to a report published by Robert Perry and Brian Barger of the Associated Press, BAC International is part of a CIA-run money laundering operation which has shuttled additional millions of taxpayer dollars to the Contras in violation of congressional restrictions. Vaughn, this is Barney Vaughn, who acknowledges his connections with top Contra leaders, says he has not seen his cousin since 1982 and denies any involvement with the Sandinista sting. Finally, there are questions about the men arrested for Seal's murder. 3 suspects, all Hispanics, were seized within 12 hours of the hit. One, while running through New Orleans International Airport waving dollar bills and screaming about his urgent need to fly to Miami. Officials later indicated that the 3 men, all considered illegal aliens, had been traced from their entry near San Diego across the country to the Hilton Hotel several days before the murder. 4 more men, one still not officially acknowledged as being linked to the Seal case, were picked up over the next 3 days. While each of the 4 is believed by law enforcement officials to have ties to the drug underworld, the mystery suspect has further links to both the Nicaraguan Contras and their sponsors among Miami's Cuban-American community. He is Jose Coutin, Coutin, a suspected drug dealer and alleged member of the terrorist group Brigade 2506, now facing drug and gun charges in Miami. Coutin's gun shop has been a well-known meeting place for Contras over the last 2 years, and it is out of that store, police believe, that Coutin sold the Uzi.
All right. I hope that you're understanding and what I'm trying to show is, well, your glyph is getting it. It is. This is the Catholics in action. It's all coming down to a continuation of the opium wars, since Satan has been loosed and everything else, everything was fine. They had their own, turf, their own corner, for prostitution, gambling, things like that. And then all of a sudden, that heroin that they were selling to the Chinese, they thought, well, we can get some money off of it here in the United States. But to get it, once you start dealing in heroin and the mob, and we've already seen how Lucky Luciano had to be let out of prison in World War II to get the mafia to help the United States. And you don't help a mafia and not owe them. Now it's the heroin, the Godfather movies. How come they never mentioned, well, where are you going to get that heroin? They were getting it from the Bermuda Triangle, and now they have it coming from Afghanistan also. And unfortunately, I've never been addicted to heroin, and neither have you, but it seems like a lot of people they love it. They love it. So that's where it's at. Put all of this in yeah, they're building the nations, they're building the wars, they're building the turf of what mafia controls what. And the only real, the wars that we see on the external, they're blaming it on our countries, are really just turf wars of who's going to, be able to find enough legal ways to launder their money. Sorry, that's the sad truth.
Used in the SEAL murder. Coutin's connection to both the drug hit and the Contras raised the obvious question as to what other connections the two worlds may share. Who killed Barry Seal? While much of the evidence still points to a drug hit, in the end there were many people, Contras, drug lords, even White House officials, who might have suffered from his testimony and who have certainly profited from his demise. The stories Barry Seal might have told about the truth behind the Managua connection,
about administration tactics against the Sandinistas and on behalf of the Contras, were buried with his body. A man praised as a star witness who knows how to hoard information and dispense it for his own advantage is a difficult man to trust. Quote, Barry was very smart, very manipulative, and he didn't always tell the same person everything he knew, says one of Seal's attorneys, Thomas Sclafani. He may well have had contacts with the CIA that are greater and more intense than anyone knew about. He always had other irons in the fire. Why should Barry Seal be left open like this? Conventional wisdom says his killers were the ones against whom he was about to testify, the Colombians. But if Barry Seal was a loose cannon who possessed information that would be embarrassing to the government, politically, let's just say, hypothetically, he was the man who knew too much, unquote. Betrayed when his mission to Managua was leaked by the White House in 1984, and enjoying the freedom to testify openly under the terms of his 1985 plea bargain, would Barry Seal have fingered the White House in 1986? In the end, perhaps it was easier to risk his murder than to trust his silence. Quote, all the federal government had to do to kill Barry Seal, says Louis Unglesby, Seal's Baton Rouge attorney, was do nothing. Then let mischief work its will.
So basically, as we've seen, the cousin of Federico Vaughn was in fact a banker with connections apparently to the CIA as well as the Contras, and also apparently to some of the people involved in the Contra supply effort, and who in turn were also implicated in the murder of Barry Adler Seal. We're going to take a look at more about some of the people involved there, namely Messieurs Coutin and Garcia. Research credit for the following story as well goes to Ted Rubenstein. This from Monday, August 4th, 1986, Miami Herald. It's headlined, Contra Supporter Tells of Tangled Scheme. This was a time when Miami teemed with intrigue and support from Nicaraguan rebels, for Nicaraguan rebels. Contra personages took to the Cuban airwaves here to raise money. Garcia, that's Jesus Garcia, recognized Posey. Posey is Tom Posey, head of Civilian Materiel Assistance, formerly Civilian Military Assistance, another person involved with the Contra supply effort. Garcia recognized Posey. He had seen him on ABC's Nightline. He was impressed. He was a famous freedom fighter, said Garcia. The two men hit it off well. Posey didn't stay in jail long. Joe Coutin, C-O-U-T-I-N, of 41, a downtown Miami gun dealer, and Jack Terrell, T-E-R-R-E-L-L, 45, a self-taught soldier of fortune, showed up to post bond. When Posey left the jail, he took Garcia's unlisted telephone number. A few days later, Posey called me, said Garcia. We got together and he reintroduced me to Coutin, and I realized that I had tripped into an organization, unquote. Posey, Garcia said, spoke to him one day about a plot to assassinate Louis Tams, then the U.S. ambassador to Colombia. As Garcia tells it, Posey told him that Colombian drug dealers wanted Tams dead and were willing to pay $1 million for his murder. The two men talked about bombing the U.S. embassy in Costa Rica when Tams arrived there on a new assignment, Garcia said. The idea was to make everyone think the Sandinistas did it, Garcia said, and this would give the United States a wonderful opportunity to invade Nicaragua. At a cocktail lounge at a Howard Johnson's near the airport, Garcia said he talked to 5 other men about the plot a few days later. Among them, he said, was Bruce Jones, once the subject of a Life magazine article, a CIA man in Nicaragua. Garcia said he saw some boxes stashed in one of the motel rooms. He believed they contained C4 explosives for the embassy job. All this, accurate or inaccurate, came to naught. No one got blown up. I just got turned off, Garcia said. I didn't want to talk about hitting an American, unquote. Jones is said to live in Arizona, and the Herald couldn't reach him for comment. Posey said that he didn't know anything about the plot. He said he helps the Contras by sending advisors, clothing, and medical supplies, never weapons and soldiers. Not long after the cocktail hour at Howard Johnson's, possibly in late February or early March 1985, Garcia said he provided Coutinho, the Miami gun dealer, with a little assistance. He said he helped him load crates of M16 automatic rifles, mortar tubes, Soviet block-made AK-47 assault rifles, and several grenade launchers into a van. Garcia said he thought the weapons were destined for the Contras in Central America. They were supposed to be shipped out of the Fort Lauderdale-Hollywood International Airport, he said. Coutinho denied all this. He is a founder of the Cuban Legion, a group of Cuban-born ex-GIs. The Legion shipped medicine, clothing, and food to the anti-Sandinistas, never guns, he said. Coutinho's gun shop, the Broadway Boutique, used to be Miami headquarters for a Contra support outfit known as CMA. Posey is CMA's leader. CMA made headlines a couple of years ago. 2 of its men were shot down in a helicopter over Nicaragua during a battle between rebels and government troops. In the summer of 1985, while fingerprinting the bad guys at jail, Garcia agreed to do a little favor for Coutinho. He had a man going to Honduras and wondered if I could possibly get a machine gun with a silencer, said Garcia. Garcia obliged. He got the weapon, he said, from a man named Chino. It didn't happen that way at all, said Coutinho. He said Garcia approached him and offered to sell him the weapon for his 11-piece machine gun collection. At any rate, Garcia still had the weapon when he received a phone call on August 8 from a stranger from Evansville, Indiana. The man identified himself as Alan Saum, S-A-U-M, and told him he wanted to see him about an important mission. He picked him up at the airport at 3 a.m. He came to me talking about patriotism and blowing up the Russian embassy in Managua. He called this operation George Bush's baby, unquote. And more about Coutinho's gun shop here and the murder of Adler Barry Seal in another little article, this one by Sandra Dibble, the same woman who wrote the other larger article, the section of which I just read. This is called Murder Weapon Came from Miami. A Uzi machine gun used in the murder of ex-TWA pilot Barry Seal, a drug smuggler turned federal informant, came from the downtown Miami gun shop of Jose Coutinho. Coutinho, 41, loaned the weapon to Jose Maria Renteria Campo, one of 6 people accused in the assassination of Seal February 20th in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. Coutinho testified before a grand jury in Louisiana. He told the Herald he lent Campo the weapon as a sample. He said Campo promised to buy a large order of guns legally. 8 days after Seal's murder, federal agents arrested Coutinho on another weapons charge. So basically the major point here is that Coutinho and Garcia, Coutinho's gun shop being the shop that provides the weapon that gets rid of Barry Adler Seal, they're basically inextricable from the milieu, the network involved in the Contra supply effort. And we're going to take a look now at the fact that basically at a possible motive for the murder of Adler Barry Seal, other than the official explanation, which is simply that he was being eliminated by the Medellin cartel.
We're going to read from an article entitled Narco-Terrorism, A Tale of Two Stories. The article is by Joel Millman, and it appeared in the Columbia Journalism Review in 1986. Skipping down into the story, the first comprehensive report of the involvement of the Contras in drug smuggling appeared at the end of 1985, when the Associated Press ran a story based on the investigations of reporters Robert Perry, spelled P-A-R-R-Y, and Brian Barger. Perry, a career AP reporter, started covering events in Central America from the Washington Bureau in 1981. Barger, who resigned from the agency in August, came to the AP in early 1985 after covering Latin America for 9 years for the Washington Post, Pacific News Service, ABC News, and others. It was Barger who had discovered the CIA, quote, murder manual distributed to Contra forces in 1984, but it was only after Perry got onto the story and emphasized the manual's endorsement of assassinations that it became front-page news. In 1985, Perry won the George Polk Award for his reporting on Central America. In March 1985, Barger, who had written several stories about private U.S. groups that were helping to outfit and train Contra forces, began hearing that the rebel leaders were involved in drug smuggling. Skipping down. After contacting several law enforcement agents, many of whom confirmed the rumors, Perry and Barger asked their editors to send them to Central America to track down the story. Initially, citing the many AP reporters already posted in Central America, the editors refused. But finally a compromise was struck, and in early December the pair flew not to Central America, but to Miami. In Miami, Contras and Contra supporters described a well-developed cocaine transshipment base in northern Costa Rica. After a flurry of phone calls to Washington, the two reporters were told that they could fly on to Costa Rica, where they soon learned that local officials had charged a Contra commander with cocaine trafficking, but had been unable to bring him to trial because he had fled to Panama. In addition, U.S. law enforcement officials in the region told the reporters that drug smuggling had become an established practice among the main Contra factions in Costa Rica. Let me read that again because that's important. This is the U.S.'s own law enforcement officials. Remember, we've talked about in the past that agencies like the DEA and the CIA are not monolithic, and that oftentimes the right hand is going after the left hand. And this is what we're talking about here. In addition, U.S. law enforcement officials in the region told the reporters that drug smuggling had become an established practice among the main Contra factions in Costa Rica. Other sources identified members of the Miami-based anti-Castro terrorist group Brigade 2506 as the chief link between Colombian cocaine lords, the Contras, and drug distributors in the U.S. Back in Washington, Perry and Barger began following up on leads and boiling down their notes into a 1,500-word story. It quickly became clear that their superiors at AP were uncomfortable. Skipping down after some descriptions of AP sitting on the story. As Christmas approached, Perry says, it looked more and more as if the wire service wasn't going to run the story. On December 16th, however, an editor working overnight at La Prensa Asociada, the AP's Spanish language wire, called up the Perry-Barger story on his computer terminal and, without checking to see if it had been cleared for publication, translated the latest draft and sent it out over the wire. The next morning, the story appeared in Spanish-language papers in New York, Miami, and throughout Latin America. Federal agents link Contras to drug smuggling, declared New York's El Diario La Prensa. Included in the story was a quote from a U.S. official linking, quote, virtually all Contra factions to drug smuggling, as well as a reference to John Hull, from whose farm drug shipments were allegedly flown. The story also included a denial from Hull, who said that the charges amounted to, quote, communist disinformation, unquote. 3 days later, on December 20th, the AP ran an English-language version of the story. Gone was the reference linking, quote, virtually all Contra factions to drug smuggling, as was any mention of Hull.
More details now about the Iran-Contra drug smuggling operation. Let's just say the involvement of drug smuggling in the Contra supply effort. We'll get to Iran presently, although obviously that's inextricable with the whole situation here. Reading now from the San Francisco Examiner of Monday, January 19th of 1987. This is a story by Rod Nordland, Nordland of Newsweek. Its headline, Jailed Trio Link Contras to Drug Trade. Dateline, Miami. Three figures in cocaine smuggling cases have resurrected questions about possible drug trading by U.S.-backed rebels fighting to overthrow the Nicaraguan government. Two of them were interviewed in federal prison in Miami last week. One is a convicted drug smuggler, Gary Betzner, 45, a crop dusting pilot from Arkansas. The other, George Morales, accused of being a smuggler, is a Colombian emigre with an aircraft chartering business who is a world champion speedboat racer. The government has charged him with running drugs as well. Facing the prospect of long jail terms, both men are trying to blame the Contra rebels, hoping to sell their story to prosecutors in exchange for immunity. The Contras didn't give a damn where the money came from, Morales said. Morales, who provided the planes, and Betzner, who flew them, both claim that CIA agents and other U.S. officials helped the Contras run the drugs out, guns in operation. I smuggled my share of illegal substance, Betzner said, but I also smuggled my share of weapons in exchange, with the full knowledge and assistance of both the DEA, Drug Enforcement Agency, and the CIA. Morales and Betzner said the Contra's leaders justified the smuggling by their need to replace the military aid taken away by Congress in 1984, then cynically pocketed the proceeds. The Contras in the field were screwed, Morales said. They didn't have enough beans to eat. In Miami, the FBI has found a third witness who claims to have seen Southern Air Transport planes being located with cocaine in Barranquilla, Colombia in 1985. The witness passed an FBI-administered lie detector test, then was given immunity from future prosecution for his involvement in the drug smuggling. Southern Air Transport is the firm implicated in Oliver North's network to supply arms to the Contras using funds from an Iranian arms deal. It also provided the plane in which American Eugene Hassenfuss was shot down by Nicaraguan government forces on a Contra supply run last year. Flight logs found on the plane show that other aircraft that had been used in the North network flew repeatedly to Barranquilla around the time that the federal witness claims to have seen the cocaine loaded. And of course, bear in mind that that same plane was used by Barry Adler Seal, in his alleged Sandinista drug sting.
Well, that kind of had an abrupt ending, but hey, I see Scotty's here. He's joined us. Shucksful, how you doing? We're going over, and I'm introducing the channel of James Ambus. James Ambus. He's a guy that like you see, none of his videos. His earliest video is 8 years ago. I started, they read emails from the Informer or James Montgomery, and they're always so interesting. Some of them are pretty long. They used to be the Radio Free America. I never knew about them. And, I knew some of the information, but I didn't know it all. Now, the one, it's a very popular one. Where is the one of the book by Russ Baker? Because that's one that's just fantastic. And it ties in. It honestly is what I believe about the Kennedys, the Bushes, and the assassination of JFK and how it leads to the John Birch Society, the who else was it? The John Birch Society. Well, you'll see, because I'm going to find it, and it Russ Baker. This Bend Over America. I've listened to that, and you can see, I've listened to most of them, but these are just since I've changed my name, and it had to, it doesn't show everything I've watched on Flat Earth Nation. So I found myself watching things and going like, hey, wait a minute. So just hold on here. Oh, there it is. Family of Secrets.
Hello, my name is Dave.
I'm going to just jump right into it. Because let's start it right about 39 minutes. That'll give us a time. We're running here at about, a little over an hour and a half. I'll get some more information. Anybody wants to come in and chat it up, that's another reason I'm here. Now, Russ Baker, Family of Secrets, it all comes down to they had to have a Bush in power during 9/11. That's what it comes down to. And so they worked through all of this. And I've had this out there on another channel, and we'll probably hear it again. But right now, if it's your first time joining it at the 39-minute mark, with no further ado, I'll try to keep up and add some pictures for you, and we'll see. Here we go.
All over the world,
And, they've only got a few rigs. You have to understand the way these companies work. They basically, what they do is they get financing to get a few rigs built or leased or what have you, and then in turn, they will lease those rigs to other companies. That's what you see with the blowout in the Gulf of Mexico, where the drilling is for BP, but it's not their rig.
Transocean is the firm that owns it.
That's right. And then another company is doing the cementing and so forth. And so it's all contracted out. In any case, Zapata Petroleum was really almost nothing as far as a company. And yet here's this man traveling all over the world to many, many places where they didn't seem to be doing any business, places that were landlocked, where there were no offshore drilling opportunities and no clear investment opportunities for them. Very, very mysterious. And so it looks like it's cover for something else. We do see when they put rigs up, they put them in places like off of Cuba prior to the Bay of Pigs invasion. We see them employing Cuban exiles. We see them being hired to put those rigs there on an island controlled by Howard Hughes, who had his own connections into the intelligence community, and then it being leased by Gulf Oil, on whose board was a man named Kermit Roosevelt. I hope I'm not throwing out too many names here.
Nope.
But Kermit Roosevelt, from, of course, the famous Roosevelt family, he was a CIA officer who was one of the key figures in the overthrow of President Mossadegh in Iran, the democratically elected president who was threatening the interests of, BP.
Mm-hmm. One of the things that you talk about too, I just was fascinated. Some of these power networks travel across the congressional aisle, and conservative Democrats such as Lyndon Baines Johnson and people like Poppy Bush and also Alan Dulles were very closely networking. One of the fascinating details, and I posted this as a food for thought, by the way, on in the news and supplemental section of my website. By the way, that's SpitfireList.com. One of the fascinating details, one of many fascinating points you bring up in Family of Secrets, Russ Baker, and that is the town Medellin in Colombia has become very well known in recent years for the epic cocaine trafficking, that in turn overlapping the Iran-Contra affair in which Poppy Bush figures. Who was picked to head up the Zapata offshore petroleum rig off of Medellin, Colombia?
Well, actually, it's even stranger than that. What I found was, first of all, one of the many revelations, literally hundreds, perhaps even thousands of revelations in Family of Secrets, is a little-known, extremely close relationship between the Bushes and Lyndon Baines Johnson. And that's very, very important, not just in terms of the context of what was happening at the time that John F. Kennedy was assassinated and Lyndon Baines Johnson ascended to the throne, and Poppy Bush's role on the Ways and Means Committee in creating legislation favorable to the oil industry, Johnson's connections to the oil industry, and on and on and on. But you see this actual personal friendship, very, very close, between Poppy, his father Prescott, and Lyndon Baines Johnson. And then you see that Zapata opens an office in Medellin. Now, I should point out that Medellin is not on the coast. If you look at the map, it's several hours from the coast. So it doesn't seem, if you had an offshore drilling company, presumably, there are cities right on the coast that's where you would put your office. Or perhaps if you wanted to be in a big city, you'd put it in the capital, Bogota, but they didn't. They put it in this peculiar place. And they hired a man named Manuel Bravo to run that office. Now, Manuel Bravo was a judge in a tiny county that was absolutely crucial in LBJ's highly contested election to the U.S. Senate. Many believe, and this has been widely written about, that LBJ basically stole that election, having some people rig it. And one of the people who there was the issue of stuffing the ballot box was Judge Manuel Bravo. And so after that, you see the Bushes giving him a job in this highly improbable place, in this highly improbable institution.
One of the events that you link Poppy Bush to in a big way, and this we could do at least an hour, probably several, on just this aspect of your book, and that is the assassination of President Kennedy. I'd like you to, again, we'll cover most of this in a future program because we're almost halfway through this side, but the George Bush of the CIA, the warning that was sent to the FBI on 11/22/63, and the question that Ted Kennedy asked at the 1988 Democratic Convention about Poppy Bush and the Iran-Contra scandal, where was George? Those 3 points. George Bush of the CIA, Mr. Parrott, and where in fact was George H.W. Bush on 11/22/63?
Well, that's quite a mouthful, and I developed that material in more than 4 chapters
Right.
of all new material related to the Kennedy assassination in Family of Secrets. So we can only begin to just barely scratch the surface.
Sure.
Essentially, what happened was, just to back way up, I began Family of Secrets trying to understand what the phenomenon of George W. Bush and Cheney and Rumsfeld and all this state of sort of perpetual war in the Mideast and all these other controversial things, suspensions of civil liberties, constant state of sort of terror, if you will, what this all meant and the enormous amounts of money that very, very wealthy and savvy Americans invested in a man of clearly somewhat limited talents. They wanted him there, and I wondered why. And this brought me to this notion of the Bush family as being seen by these extended networks as crucial sort of soldiers on their behalf. W, his father Poppy, the grandfather Prescott, the great-grandfather Samuel, and so on. And that was very revealing to me. And then I began studying the relationship between W and his father, Poppy, because W would never have become president, obviously, if his father had not already been a brand name. Certainly couldn't have made it on his own. And so I began looking at the father, and the more I looked at the father, the more I found this secret history, and I found this explanation that when he was made CIA director in 76 as a neophyte, that was a false story, that he actually was put in as part of an ongoing cover-up of what the CIA had actually been up to, and that was because he himself was CIA prior. And I lay out the evidence of that in Family of Secrets. You pointed out about Zapata offshore and so forth. And so then we have him in all these years in between, in the 1960s. And what's he doing? Well, he's a private oil man, and he's getting involved in Republican Party politics. But I run across this odd fact, which is how he just avoids talking about the biggest event of the 60s, the biggest event, certainly of 1963, the assassination of John F. Kennedy in Texas. Keep in mind that the elder Bush is a Texan at that point. He is actually running for political office in Texas, national political office. He's running for the U.S. Senate nomination from Texas, basically opposing the policies of John F. Kennedy. So when I look at his diaries, published diaries and memoirs, and I see that he has the most minute events and so on, and we get to November 63, and he just completely skips it altogether. And then I hear that he'd been interviewed and was asked just in a very benign sense, somebody asked him to recall what happened when Kennedy was shot and how he felt about it. And they asked him, to recall where he was and so on, and he just drew a blank. He could not remember where he was on November 22, 1963. And so that, of course, is such an astonishing thing for somebody who was probably about 40 years old at the time. And so I thought, boy, what is that about? And I began trying to understand that. And this took me, Dave, no kidding, parallel to my other research, 4 or 5 years of digging into the Kennedy assassination as it relates to just where was Poppy. Mm-hmm. And so, I have to say that I am not what you would call a Kennedy assassination buff. Didn't really know a lot about it, didn't have an extensive library on the topic, didn't really have any position on it. One heard that perhaps Oswald had done it, perhaps he had done it alone, perhaps he hadn't, perhaps other people involved. There are a lot of different theories out there. But generally, most professional journalists stay away from the topic because it seems to be a sort of professional quicksand.
That's why I went into what I went into at the beginning of the interview. Continue.
Yeah, and so I, stayed away from it. I just didn't see any reason to get into it. But now I felt compelled to answer this question. And when I began trying to answer it, I started coming upon bits and pieces of things. And then as I started knowing what I was looking for, it gradually grew and grew and grew until it was a torrent. And at this point, I started calling friends of mine, including a Pulitzer Prize winner at a major American newspaper, and I'd say, come to lunch, I need to talk to you. And I'd say, I'm starting to get alarmed here. I'm starting to find things that are so big and so disturbing. They're way beyond even the things that somebody who's really been, very tough on the system all these years, it's too big for me. And I would show them these things, and I'd say, I think there's a reason that this guy says he can't remember where he is. He cannot say where he was. And I would show them what I had, and they would start getting scared, and they'd say, boy, you better be careful. This is dangerous stuff. And so, I had my nightmares. I had my panic attacks, I guess, but I kept persisting and I kept looking into this, and I began finding all of these fascinating facts. And you alluded to a few of them. We can only go into them very briefly now, and perhaps more, as you said, on a future program. But basically, you start finding out that there were all these interesting activities on the part of Mr. Bush, on the part of a whole bunch of friends and colleagues and associates of his in the CIA, in Army intelligence, oil industry figures, powerful right-wing businessmen in Dallas. All these people were friends, and they were all connected. They all had a tremendous amount of animosity for John F. Kennedy and for the policies that he was carrying out. And this actually caused me to even rethink John Kennedy himself, because, you know, I'd heard all of these things. A lot of people described him as, they said he really was no liberal. He was a cold warrior. He was this, he was that. But as I began looking into all these things and studying him carefully, I began to see that actually he was much more of a reformer and a risk taker than I think a lot of people realize, that both he and his brother were fearlessly and almost recklessly taking on simultaneously many of the major power centers in America. In other words, instead of just taking on, say, one at a time, as Barack Obama is doing, they were taking on everyone. They were angering the military. They were fighting with the CIA. They fired Allen Dulles. They angered Prescott Bush. They were not playing ball with the oil industry. They were not playing ball with large American multinationals, with mines in foreign countries.
Civil rights,
the steel industry. They were fighting with J. Edgar Hoover and the FBI.
organized crime.
And this goes on and on and on. They were going after everybody. I mean, if you look at it, it sort of seems either crazy or just phenomenally courageous, or both.
Well, and you go into just great length about what Poppy Bush was doing in Dallas, Texas on November 22nd, 1963, and how he dissembled. Russ Baker, author of Family of Secrets, subtitled The Bush Dynasty, America's Invisible Government and the Hidden History of the Last 50 Years. We haven't, sadly, got 50 years left to cover this. I think we could probably do it if we could both live long enough and sustain our stamina. We've got less than 8 minutes. What I'd like to do would be, and if we have to take a pass on some of these points, let's do so and table these for future interviews, because we could do an awful lot of interviews, and I'd like to do many interviews in the future, staggered over time. Let's take some bullet points, and perhaps that's an advised term under the circumstances. In his book, The Ends of Power, H.R. Haldeman described the whole Bay of Pigs thing, which is what Nixon didn't want to come out in Watergate, as a code word within the Nixon White House, the Kennedy assassination. Poppy Bush, the intelligence community, and Watergate. What do you have to say about that?
Oh, boy. Well, this was another area where despite having covered politics and done investigative reporting on power spheres for several decades, I didn't consider myself very expert on Watergate. And I think a lot of us kind of, if we're old enough, we vaguely remember, and of course, you know, the bad guys, Haldeman, Ehrlichman, Mitchell, what have you. John Dean is this sort of complex figure, who sort of, kind of turned prosecution witness and blew the whistle on the thing and so on. And, Woodward and Bernstein as the great journalistic heroes who brought down an out-of-control president and so on. And I got into this whole thing for Family of Secrets because now I was on the trail of George H.W. Bush, Poppy Bush, or Bush 41, already had established, to my satisfaction, that he appeared to be involved in covert intelligence activities long before he was named CIA director and when he had a very different titles, congressman, oilman, diplomat, and so forth. And so I was very interested in him. And then I followed his rise, his own political rise, and I was struck by the fact that Richard Nixon was very much instrumental in that. And I wondered why Richard Nixon went to such lengths to help Poppy Bush. And I discovered, and I think we should table for a future conversation, the backstory, the secret back relationship between the Bush family and their circle and the rise of Richard Nixon, the control of Richard Nixon, how Richard Nixon was basically shaped and dominated by these elite interests throughout his political career until such time as he became president of the United States. And what I reveal in several chapters in Family of Secrets is that Nixon began trying to become independent. And
And we're down to less than 5 minutes now. I want to stress that there is no way we can even begin to really do justice. We could spend several interviews just about the Kennedy assassination, just about Watergate, or just about W. Let's touch briefly on Harkin Energy and how it grew out of a couple of intelligence and drug smuggling connected banks, BCCI and the Nugan Bank. Just very briefly, if you can, and if not, we'll table that for a future.
Okay, let me just go as general as I can here. I mean, basically, what we're looking at is intelligence operations are tremendously expensive, and they largely involve moving money around, huge amounts of money, billions and billions and billions of dollars that have to be all untraceable and unaccountable, used for operations, used for bribery, used for all kinds of things. And so they create these front companies. There are lots and lots and lots of them, hundreds of them, thousands of them, front companies or enterprises put inside of legitimate companies for cover. And so this is crucial, little known, little examined. I began looking at a company called Harkin Energy, which was instrumental in the rise of George W., our most recent past president. This company was instrumental in securing his financial future, giving him some credentials, and basically taking some failing companies that he was involved with and taking them over, and thereby making him appear to be a successful businessman, which was absolutely crucial shortly thereafter when he began running for governor of Texas. So Harkin Energy was an interesting company. Other journalists had looked at Harkin over the years, Time Magazine, the Wall Street Journal, and so on. They all concluded that this was a very, very strange outfit because the numbers didn't make any sense. And without going into too much detail, it just didn't, it seemed to exist for some purpose other than making money for shareholders. And so in Family of Secrets, I have a whole chapter just on Harkin, go into, who were the people involved. And again, no time here, but basically they trace back to links to all of these international power centers, the kleptocratic Philippine dictator Ferdinand Marcos, the very wealthy interests in South Africa that subjugated the black population, the bloodthirsty Shah of Iran, who again stole vast amounts of money from the Iranian people, setting up the current animosities between Iran and the United States are seldom discussed as we talk about whether we should be waging war with the theocratic regime there, and others, Saudis, and on and on and on. And so what was this company?
Let me just jump in ever so briefly, because we're going to run out of time. We could do many programs about Harkin Energy, as with Zapata. I guess one could say another oil, ostensibly oil company, the holes are greater than the sum of the parts. We are down to less than a minute. You read about Mickey Herskowitz.
Yeah, we're going to interrupt it right there and let it go. Oh, did I have that up the whole time? I didn't mean to be showing a comment. I know that could be frustrating. So, we can get back to it and a lot of different things, but it all ties in. They're all working it together. Let me just try to close it up with, instead of this, and see if I can't just run something down here. And let's just look at Goldwater girls. Goldwater girls. Hillary Clinton. Yes, she was a Goldwater girl. So, there's no denying it right there, She was a Goldwater girl. Let's just drop her out of the search, find out what is Goldwater girls, who was Barry. All right, come on now. We got the good Wi-Fi. Hillary Clinton did support, the Republican in 1964, but she didn't vote for a candidate who vowed to resegregate America. So she supported him. She got her picture taken and everything else, and she was big into it. Her family were, liberals, or something like that. She was an active young Republican, it said. Here's Goldwater. She had but then she got sent, to Washington by, I think it was John Porter, one of the only few conservatives, called himself a Republican, always elected there in a rich suburb, just like who was the other one on the north side? I'll remember his name. Oh, Phil Crane. Phil Crane. So she couldn't vote for him, but she would have. So Barry Goldwater, she was there with Barry. She got assigned to work at the, help impeach Nixon, as a Republican. And then that's when she kind of was like, oh, I'm going over to, the Democratic Party. She met Bill. They fell in love. They were both scholars. They got trips to England and Russia. And there they got him drunk, blackmailed him, and were able to use those pictures for the rest of their lives because, well, who knows what they were doing, but obviously they were under control at that time. So I believe that Goldwater ran against JFK. One of the deals with Goldwater was, let's look at the LBJ. Now, who swore in LBJ? The swearing in on the airplane, it's a very, very famous thing. Now, let's just get the story behind the photo and the trailblazing woman in the corner. That would be her, who they're going to be talking about, Sarah Hughes. Sarah Hughes administered the oath of office for Lyndon Johnson just about an hour and a half after Kennedy was declared dead. They got this robot standing here. She couldn't wait. She got married within like 3 or 4 years to an Areonassus, one of the richest Greek tycoons in the world, mafia, a yacht builder. Yeah, right. By the way, it's a dude, man. So, but I'm only here worried about, not because I'm a Hughes and this is Sarah Hughes, but I just wanted you to talk about Sarah Hughes. Forget it, man. I'm not even going to stay on that page anymore. We bounced back. It's not the ice skater Sarah Hughes. That's an obfuscation. Hey, I got the wrong Sarah Hughes. Not ice skater. Trying to make a point, man. You don't, out of every other thing, it shows up. Oh, there it is. I misspelled Sarah, I see. So Sarah Hughes. Huh. American lawyer and federal judge. Well, how'd she get to be a judge? She's best known as the judge who swore in Lyndon B. Johnson. And, well, gee whiz, she was put in office by Lyndon B. Johnson. Yeah, she was born, whatever that is, Thielgman. And she was the daughter of the Thielgmans, and she married a Hughes, obviously. She went there. What I'm trying to tell you is she received a recess appointment from John F. Kennedy to the district court. Somehow, in the movies and everything else, This was the one thing that where Sarah Hughes was highly recommended by LBJ. It's on the record. So JFK used LBJ to put Sarah Hughes on the court. Sarah Hughes was there in Dallas conveniently to swear in LBJ on that flight. Now, where was she later? Where was she later? She was in position to be the judge that the abortion issue was brought into play. And she was in position to be, with Goldwater, who, as a Republican, did what the Democrats are crying for them to do now. If we could just have one Republican come over, well, it was Goldwater. It was Goldwater. It was Sarah Hughes. It was LBJ. It was JFK. There was no stopping this. It was Roe v. Wade. Everything is hitting it right there. Now, I'm going to, this one is 2 hours. I'm going to go and I'm going to drop a little comment in here, hang out a little bit, and, I've got to, chat with Tommy and see what's going on there. Here's if anybody wants to come in, if they have anything, well, Dwayne's got the whole idea down, right? And now, after over 75 million babies, and they could have, met somebody, fell in love, oh, I'm burning, Paco. What should I do? Get married, man. Get married. Have kids. That's like what the Apostle Paul would say. That's what you're here for, man. Not to throw your seed around with every, well, you know what the Bible calls them that will accept you, but to find a girl and fall in love and make babies. So that's what it all is about. But isn't that interesting? The LBJ, JFK, Sarah Hughes, she's the judge, then Roe v. Wade. Goldwater's still there. Boom, he comes over as, votes with the Democrats. It's all way too much. So I can see nobody wants to avail themselves to it. And I don't blame you, but it is going to give me time to, Lord willing, if not tonight, then later, I want to do a study on Rebecca in the Bible and that whole deal with, Jacob. And, all of a sudden, Isaac was going to bless Esau. Are you with me on that? Edna, Fractal Bear, Dwayne, anybody else that's still here, or still, there's 11 people, but are you familiar with that? Isaac, known covenant keeper, was ready to give the blessing to Esau. We're going to be digging into that real soon. And I'd like you back here. So that's the way it goes. That's okay. It is absolutely all right. But if you want to dig into that a little bit, go ahead and read that again in Genesis, what was going on there. Because a lot of people go, oh, Jacob was a deceiving, doing this and that. Rebecca had gotten word from the Lord. She was moving on instinct from the Lord. Now, it's not recorded. We don't have one of those, Rebecca's a prophetess and he said this to her, but it does communicate. She was not lying. God communicated to her. We got to nip this in the bud. Isaac's sick. He's not thinking right. Is that it? Is it that simple? I think so. I think it's worth looking into, though. But we definitely are going to get in with what was going on. Did Rebecca save the day? I think she did, because although a lot of people in the Bible, sometimes they, they want to knock the covenant keeper Jacob. And, even Isaac goes, oh, he deceived me. And then another guy, well, he deceived me. He was obeying somebody that was, over him in Christ. And I will right now give you the challenge. No, I think I'm coming back on around like 8:30. And I'll give you the challenge between now and 8 o'clock, 8:30. Look up a Bible verse. And so you can come on here and rub it in Paco's face and say, I found the Bible verse you said wasn't there. Find me the Bible verse where God says one negative thing about Jacob, the covenant keeper. Not Isaac, not other people, where God says, I'm so mad at Jacob. In a way that he's mad at Jacob. And that he thinks that, yeah, I just used that sneaky little snaky thief. Baloney. Let's be very careful how we talk about known covenant keepers, even if Isaac was kind of getting goofy there at the end. I think, and I hope I can make that argument. So in the meantime, let's pray. Let's pray for I like touchdown Tommy. I've always liked quarterbacks. I couldn't play. I'm so slow. I have a good arm and everything like that, but it really honest. It was so frustrating for my wife and family. They used to say I actually was that guy that looked like I was dragging a piano. So find that homework. Let's say a quick prayer. Tommy has a very important thing Tuesday morning, and then on Wednesday he's getting a needle that's about this long shoved into his spine. He's getting a needle shoved into his spine. So we're going to be remembering that because I've had that, and it's scary. Hey, what's going on? Okay, so something just popped up. I must have hit it. So you know how to pray. Heavenly Father, we thank you for this chance to share. I look forward now to go over and listening and be ready to present on Isaac and Rebecca and Jacob. What an intense time of scripture. Let us all be prepared for that, and mentally and spiritually. I pray for Tommy and his family and myself as we, he has no worries in the world, but this is going to have some kind of an effect on him, and we'll wait and see what that does and what's going on here. I pray for everybody else that has, we've all got those nagging aches and pains. Father, help us to do what we can to make the time to work and give our temple that preventive maintenance that goes so far in keeping ourselves healthy and happy and pleasing you. We look forward to growing spiritually and then one day having it revealed to us. And thank you for eternity, for that's how long it will take to enjoy the fellowship with everyone and learn the intimate details. And who knows what Lord has in store for us. Amen. In Jesus' name, amen. We don't know what the Lord has in store for us. We do know that the angels up in heaven right now, here's your job. Gabriel, go do this. Michael, go do that. Things like that. And, that we do know it says that when Jesus was being crucified, that the angels were desirously looking in to see what manner of things this is, So it's still a time of, intellectual stimulation, living and learning, but without the infection that a splinter would cause in an eye, a mote in the eye, an infection that is in the body, and it can't last. And we are metaphor for a spirit body. John 4:24, God is a spirit. Those who worship him must worship him in spirit and in truth, but we are physical. So we'll keep learning in our spiritual state as we, live and learn forever, glorifying in the Lord, and take this in the jest that I mean it. Because, I'm a one dome person, but it sure is intriguing with, all these other ones, like maybe there's other lands and there's other things, And I always tell them, well, maybe there's a dome for the ear, because it does use that, we are striving to be like David, the apple of God's eye. And this is eyeball earth, and I think I've proven that, at least enough for my own, satisfaction. And so if there's earball earth out there and they think they're almost as good as us, well, we'll see when we get to heaven. You see, because that's the joke. You don't want to, because the Bible says, can the eye work without the ear, and everything like that. But, and also, am I just kidding? Am I just saying, hey, we're the eye. We're the one they used as the example. So am I kidding? Or am I just so proud that God has made us relatives and we are going to be like David, the apple of his eye? So Flat Earth Nation, I'm never going to tell you anything else. I believe Mudflood was Armageddon. And I want you to believe that. Why wouldn't I? I have your best interest at heart. I'm trying to prove I do. Amen. Hallelujah. Aho.